This is the ABQ Business Podcast with your host, Jason Rigby. Each week we'll interview visionary business leaders to inspire the creative power and spirit that's in every entrepreneur. Discussing strengths, weaknesses, strategies, systems, and the problems we can all solve together for a new future for local small business.
It is 68 degrees here in Albuquerque. I know a lot of you are swearing at me right now. I know the 300 days of sun just kind of kills each and every one of you, especially now in some of the like Northwest area. I was talking to somebody, they were 41, 42 degrees, just constant rain. I have a special guest today, Dr. Richardson, Dr. James Richardson. He is the founder of Premium Growth Solutions, a strategic planning consultancy for early stage consumer packaged good brands. He's professionally trained cultural anthropologist, and we're going to get into that cultural anthropologist part. He's worked with over 75 CPG brands, Coca-Cola, General Mills, Kraft Foods, Frito-Lay's, Hershey's, and he's done some, Mother Kombucha, Rebel Creamery, Once Upon a Farm. James is the author of Ramping Your Brand, How to Rule the Killer CPG Growth Curve, and he's the #1 bestseller in business consulting on Amazon. He's also the host of his own podcast, so you guys hop on over after the show. Not now, after the show, and subscribe. You can go on Spotify or Apple, subscribe to the Startup Confidential. That is his podcast. Dr. Richardson, how are you doing today?
I am great, Jason. It's 76 here in Tucson.
Oh, you beat me.
Am I off to a bad start?
No, that's awesome. I love it. Yeah, I wish I was there with the 76. That's great. I love Tucson. Last time I was there last year, there's a little, it was super packed, and it's like a Sunday brunch place. And you have to park on the side of the street, and then you go in there. I wish I had known the name. Amazing. Just absolutely amazing. I looked it up, best Sunday brunch place in Tucson.
Wow.
And it blew everything that I've ever been to out of the water.
I hope it's still in business, not to be macabre. We're new to town, so I'm just soaking it all in, mainly the sun.
Oh, yeah. It's so amazing. I moved from Seattle to Albuquerque, and it's just every day you wake up and it's just so beautiful. That sun is shining.
We've lost all our listeners now. They're enraged.
I think it's awesome. Well, I want to kind of get started in the very beginning of you exploring this aspect of you being a culture anthropologist. You also got into symbolism, which I want to get into that too, because I know this is going to outlie your book. You were a culture anthropologist in Southeast Asia. Can you kind of take us through that story of being, in Southern India?
Yeah. So I had a roommate in college who was from Nepal. And I couldn't figure the guy out. I was majoring in anthropology at the time, which was kind of a shrug major at the time. It was sort of serious, but not too serious. And I couldn't figure out my roommate because he spoke with a perfect American accent, but he'd only been in the country for 3 years. I mean, perfect. Like if you listen to him, you'd think he was from Ohio. And obviously very smart. And and he did some American things, and then other things he just couldn't understand. And then so it was this jumble of stuff. And yet he didn't really seem that foreign to me, quote unquote. And so I just, I would hang out with him, and I would, because I was the annoying budding anthropologist, I would just ask super nosy questions all the time about his family and that. Probably some of them were not politically correct questions, but we'll come back to that. So I just couldn't figure the guy out because he was a mix of modern and not modern, and he didn't seem to be Nepali. So I was just right. And so I would ask, when I got into deeper questions, I would start to hear about Nepal, and I would understand, oh, yeah, I don't really understand this guy. He's not what he appears to be on the surface. So what is he? I mean, who is he? I mean, what the hell's going on here? So over a process of a couple of years, I got after him sharing stories of his family and stuff like that, I'm like, oh my God, this guy's like a freak. He's from a very conservative family, and he's like talking with an American accent here in college, as if, and his number one music, his CD collection contains every Beatles song ever. And all I can talk about is the Beatles. It's just like,
that's crazy.
Of course, it's the early 90s, so like the Beatles aren't really cool. So we used to tease him for that.
Right.
So it's like that's 30 years ago. So, but I became fascinated. I mean, he fascinated me. And so I there were a lot of people at my school at the time who were coming from South Asia for undergraduate only. And so they didn't really, they weren't Americanized before they showed up. And he was a particularly interesting guy. And I still talk to him on a fairly regular basis. But I ended up deciding that I wanted to study. I was just interested in India and South Asia in general because it seemed like a classical civilization that had an enormous history, a lot of complexity, and I wanted to sort of drown in that complexity. I wanted to get out of the United States just personally, for a variety of reasons. It wasn't because I'm anti-American. It's because I've always been a misfit. And I think most cultural anthropologists would probably raise their hand in agreement with that. Some might take more drinks than others, so we're the opposite of you, Jason, the veteran who's like, literally, if you join the military, like there's no struggle with fitting into America. Yeah, exactly. Right. So, but I never fit in because I was a geek. And I also am, if you go to my website, I explain it a little bit more. But I'm basically a high functioning Asperger's guy, and so we don't have a lot of friends because I tend to say things even early on in friendships that to me are just interesting, but they're like totally inappropriate.
Yeah, no, and I read that on your website, and I love that. But I mean, it helps you with what you do.
Yes, it does, because when I went to India, and I know this is what your question was, I went to India, I found myself, I went with one topic, which I won't get into, and then the country presented me with another topic. It like shoved it in my face. And that topic was, what do you do when your family's untouchable and you've come from the lowest status rung of society, but that identity is invisible? So it only gets disclosed through interrogating conversations about your natal village or who you're related to. But you're middle class and college educated.
Yeah.
Well, what you do is you pass, right? And that's something that homosexuals do in the United States historically. Not much anymore, but they used to have to do that. And it's something that some African Americans do if they're very light skinned. Right. So that's the only experience. That's the only analog you'll see in the United States. But in India, you're talking about 50 million people who are living in the villages in very degraded situation. And some of them managed to get out. So I was in a community that I didn't assume that was full of these folks, but it turned out to be the case. So I just switched my topic. And then my topic suddenly, Jason, became super sensitive. Now I'm the guy, I'm Mr. Inappropriate Asperger. This sounds like a train wreck waiting to happen. But the reality, and maybe it was if you go over there and ask them, but it's not for me to judge. So I had to, to meet the requirements of a good social science research product, I had to invade people's privacy about something very, very, very sensitive. And what was funny is they lied to me in their living rooms, like most of them.
I would imagine if so it's kind of a stranger coming in and asking questions.
Well, a mix of that. So I did what they call, I did a community study essentially in a suburban community. And it was an old missionary community. It was half that and then half Hindu. And so there was this group there was about 2,000 Christians there who were from descendants of converts essentially. And they were highly educated because they had gone to the mission schools.
No, that
Their
makes
Hindu,
sense. Right.
their Hindu neighbors, ironically, were completely like gun educated still. So it was like this bizarre, like. So, anyways, I didn't walk. I went there to study religious identity and how it's like performed or not in the streets and yada yada yada. But what happened is I found out that all these people I was doing a household census with were lying to me. Because I would do the household census, like literally, I'd go in with my little figurative clipboard and I would ask like, 10 sort of standardized questions. So I'd get the same data, and then I would just go in house after house and do. I didn't know the community that well. I was living there, so I was becoming a part of it. And then I just realized after 18 months, I had done enough genealogical research in the community to realize who'd been lying to me.
So,
And it was most of the people. And then I realized, that's interesting. Why do these educated people, who some of whom have cars and Honda motorcycles, like why do they need to lie to the American?
mm-hmm.
Now, yes, I was talking to everybody, so that's one reason. But I later learned that this is what they do with everybody. So they just put on an act. And I won't get into Indian sociology, but they were lying about their caste identity, and they were moving themselves up 2 or 3 ranks.
That makes sense. We do that. We do that here on Instagram. Yeah,
there we go. So there's a lot of puffery, right? So that's a common human thing in hierarchical societies. So now I'm really hooked, because this is the anthropologist's dream, was to have a topic like this shoved in your face, because but you have to be willing to be that obnoxious, like to go into people's living rooms and say, essentially, and there's a polite way to ask it in India, like, what, do you mind telling me what community you're from? Right. And that's the polite way, but it's actually really offensive in the household of someone who's trying to hide it.
Yes.
Well, so I get that. I used to get people who are like, I can't believe you asked that question, James. It's so rude. And I'm like, not to 80% of Indians. They don't have a problem with their caste. I'm happy to tell you what it is.
Yeah, especially if you know that it's socially acceptable, or if they're from middle class or upper.
Well, it doesn't even matter. I mean, most caste communities don't have a lot of degraded stigma. I mean, the vast majority of them, even if the person is not that wealthy or educated. So it's just, but I had to do it. That's social science. Social science means you have to be willing to be slightly impolite, because you have to get at core facts. And I also had to do the genealogy because I had a sense that people were lying to me. So, there's ways you use corroboration and then genealogy to say, okay, this is what's going on in this community. And I think it didn't surprise. I actually shared with people in the community that I had figured it out. And they weren't surprised. They knew I was smart.
So what do you think in understanding anthropology? What do you think, as far as branding goes? Whenever, because I know you wrote, and I encourage everybody to get it, ramping your brand. And I know a lot of probably what you studied has been implemented into this. When you're looking at people, and you're looking at branding, what are some of the things, if you want to bridge those two together, what are some of the things that bridge it together?
So one of the themes that connects sort of my professional training, and not so much India, but things I learned analytically there in my field work and the work that I do now with entrepreneurs, is this notion that, one, things are not what they seem on the surface.
Yes.
Especially with your consumers. So if you're just scanning like Instagram comments, this is not how you discover what's driving the behavior of your fans. Because what they're doing on Instagram, is they're performing. I mean, every comment is essentially an audience-centric performance.
Yes, exactly.
And that includes the trolling comments, right? Like, let me see who I can get a reaction out of because I'm a jerk, right? So, I mean, all of that is performance. And so that's Instagram talk. That is not a honest, direct, and transparent portal into that commenter's brain in any possible way. Or better yet, you can't assume that, right? If you're a business owner trying to understand your consumers. you have to be a little more skeptical that like the truth behind your fans is going to be that easy to discover. And so it may
Right.
not be as hard to discover as what I went through and just described, where it's like everybody's deliberately lying to you because they're terrified that you, the crazy 25-year-old, might go tell everybody in town. You know?
Right.
But the stakes aren't that high. But people perform, people communicate based on context and what they're trying to project unconsciously in every social situation. This is what social scientists are trained to understand. And it's hard to appreciate it until I, work with clients, and almost every one of my clients that I work with, these people are gung-ho founders. Some of them probably listening right now. And they have passionately innovated something in food or beverage or alcohol or whatever, and they want to scale this thing. They're super pumped about it, and they have a particular reason why they started the company, a set of reasons, particular drivers. Some they're aware about, some of they're not aware about. Right, so we all have varying degrees of self-awareness, but they'll have a story about why they founded the company and why, and you can get at that. And sometimes they put it on their website. The relationship between like their motivation to start the company and their why, and why people are buying their product 2, 3, 4 times a month for months on end and maybe years on end, and which is how you make money in consumer packaged goods, is you create a repeat purchasing fan base that sticks with your brand for a couple of years at least, and you just keep piling those people up, and it grows exponentially when you do it right. And this is what Kind Bar did to grow. This is what Vita Coco did to grow. They created gonzo users at ridiculously rapid rates. And that creates enormous growth. They didn't build the business on dabblers, right? Oh, I'm here at 7-Eleven. Why the hell not? I'll have this brand. Like that's actually not how you build a brand.
Right, exactly.
But you could build a $20 million C-store business doing that, and you can find those products at a gas station because they're like the badly branded ones with the crappy packaging. And there's some bald guy who sits around and he packages stuff up in a co-man warehouse, and that's like his business model, right? But we're here to talk about how you build a brand, and that's what my book is about. And when you build a brand the way that I describe it, exponentially, you have to eliminate that gap between your why behind the business, which is your view of your product line, and what the fans think about it. The challenge is that in the first 2 months, there may be no gap. Right. I worked with a hard kombucha company recently called June Shine. They're based in San Diego. They built this multi-million-dollar business in one city. One city.
That's crazy.
That's because they're surfers. And so they had they had this super intense outdoor, like what I would call basically extreme skier, boarder, surfer, these people, right? We all know these folks, and they all know each other. So they had this super jacked group of hyper networked, basically kids in their 20s who are always hanging out with each other, and it basically spread like a disease, right? They're all drinking it. And they thought of it as a lifestyle drink, right? Because they could drink it and then still go out and surf or whatever.
Right.
Because hard kombucha metabolizes differently in the body than the same 4% alcohol drink. So it's like a light beer, but it's hipper, right? And so they had their own set of values. And then, when I worked with them, we did some research. I can't get into the details because they'll kill me. But the point is, there was a huge difference between what drove that early, first 2 years and the founder's motivation for founding the company, and what's now driving their national expansion, their national repeat buyer base. I mean, for one thing, it was founded by a bunch of guys, and 80% of their fans are female.
That's crazy. So
now that was
that work?
Well, you need an anthropologist to sort of bring that sort of
right.
I mean, actually, that wasn't that different than the damn India story I just told you. I mean, guy goes there to study religious identity, like some pseudo theologian, and suddenly he's got people lying to him about their caste identity, but they have college. He can't figure out what's going on. It's the same thing. I mean, so that was that's a thing that you have to work with clients on to get them to understand that if you want to grow a big business, this is no longer about you.
Yes.
I mean, I don't mean to get religious, but it's like so not about you anymore. If you want it to be entirely about you, that's how you bury yourself into a niche. So,
Oh, right.
you know, I mean,
Like a Gary Vaynerchuk or something like that.
yeah, I mean, I
Um,
think you got to be willing to let go of your view of your product line, your brand to scale. To some degree, you've
mm,
got to let it. I mean, Dan Lebetsky, for God's sakes, Dan Lebetsky is a former management consultant, um, self-professed, and I think honest do-gooder, who had a failed like nonprofit brand that he screwed up in Israel, and like it was a total disaster. Lost a lot of money before he founded Kind. But then, as he narrates in his own book, he founds this book, and guess who the repeat fans of Kind Bar were that sent that business to glory? Almost all women, heavily yoga geeks.
mm,
Does that sound like Dan Lebetsky? You've seen him on Shark Tank. No.
yes, yeah.
So it's just like there's a great example. Now, see, Dan was smart enough to realize, okay, this is really not about me. And he started a failed business that was all about him. It was all about his desire to give back to, I think, the hungry in Israel. It was all this very much about his mission for blah, blah, blah. He didn't give a crap about his customers. I mean, the way he ran the business. But the second time around, guess what happens? He lets the customer decide. So what I coach people on and what allows you to become an exponential growth brand in consumer brands, at least that are sold, things you buy at Target, right? You get out there, you throw this thing out there, you learn from your fans who they are. And if you have the resources, you go find more people who are like your heavy users. And then you use marketing, placement, and other tricks that aren't super secret, really. And you just find more of them. And that's what Kind Bar did. They created a field marketing machine because it took them a couple of years, but they learned these are the kinds of events. They hired yoga teachers part-time to staff the events.
That's smart.
Because they had fan bases locally. Like imagine if your yoga teacher is like at the city festival on food. Well, that's going to be really powerful, more than some random like 25-year-old. So they learned from their consumers. They even hired them. It was not about Dan Lebetsky. That's what I can tell you. Because
Right, but I mean, you could see how brands screw this, shit up in the sense of, what if they would have hired a girl, with scantily clothes, handing out bars. I mean, that would have turned their audience off, which are
the
yoga.
The Sturgis bike rally approach to brand ambassador.
Yeah, a biker girl up there handing out Kind bars, and it would have destroyed the brand, So that's extremely smart.
I've seen many a supplement brand do that to it. So
how do you get out of, and this is going to kind of be esoteric, but how do you get out of your brand? Like, how do you get yourself out of your brand?
Oh man, this is so important, and it's not the topic I thought I was going to have to deal with as a consultant for this. No, I really didn't, because I worked as a consultant to big public firms, and those people are all careerists. I mean, I probably shouldn't say this, but they don't give a fuck about the brands they work on.
Right.
The people at General Mills don't give a shit. They don't even eat the brands.
Right. Of course. Yeah.
They don't even eat the shit anymore because they're all upper middle class people who are too good for that. So, I mean,
right. No, 100%.
It's just a game. It's literally a mathematical game to them. Mm-hmm. So they're actually easy to consult with because they're emotionally uninvolved.
No, that makes sense. Yeah.
They are utterly detached. Their problem is they won't listen to the right things that the consumers are saying to them. But my audience now, I think you're getting at this with your question, is how do you get them out of their own sort of brand ego? And I think the way that you do it is you get them. I actually have a course online. I'm sorry to plug it, but I actually tell founders to go do the consumer research themselves. Yes, they're not qualified, but I don't care. Just having conversations where they shut up and listen.
That's so important.
Is like the first step.
Right.
It's also the transition from the wedding to a real marriage.
That 2 years in.
It's just like, so can you shut up and listen to their stories? You would be shocked. I'm still shocked. I still have clients who are like telling me they'll share data, and I will look at like their direct consumer data. I'm like, there's like 15 people here. There's 15 people who I don't know, they bought $10,000 worth of your product last year. Did you call them? No. Just like, you don't find that odd? I mean, surely they're not eating all these bars themselves, right? So what you find when you do those phone calls, first of all, you get like an hour. You get an hour of gushing and storytelling. And if you listen right and ask the right questions, you'll find out that they've been your free brand ambassador and you didn't do anything for them.
Mm.
You didn't even
How
give them
many
a call.
marketing ideas would you get from that hour call?
Well, it's amazing how like calling up your big fans and listening. I'm talking early on, not when you're $1 billion business, but early on, calling up your fans or even emailing them, asking for their input. You will get emails, man. If your product is good, you will get emails, and they will not be short emails. They will not be executive emails like doing great. They will literally be dissertations. So it's just like, and that's where the gold is, right? Because that's literally like raw information about the lifestyle, the behaviors and the habits of the people who like you. And if you can do some pattern analysis, which is really basically what is pattern? I mean, honestly, it's just like looking for similar words and statements. And my course actually just teaches you how to do this stuff, because it's not that hard. You just have to have a system, a very simple system. And you have to ask people the same questions. And then you listen. And then you figure out what the drivers are. And then you figure out how far away you are from these people. Like, are you the male surfer buddies making millions off of women? Then you got to figure out how to run your business to cater to those folks.
Yes.
And that might mean a whole bunch of things, Jason, like you need a female marketing staff, not the bro you have.
Yeah, exactly. One guy's just shredding all the time. You know, it's his friend.
Yeah, like his bro. And I'm not talking about my particular client, but I've seen this kind of thing where you have the bro doing like the YouTube goofy fart memes and stuff, and your audience is all female. I mean, come on. So it's just like, and things get really disconnected.
Yes.
When the business is growing really fast and you're not in touch, then the gap can get really wide, and then that's when people realize they think their marketing's not working, but they don't really even know their consumer. So it's just like, oh yeah. So I come back. I always come back to my time in India, because it was very much like that was like a world-class laboratory, and things are not quite what they seem to be. So,
right.
I think we must investigate, Sherlock, and it's no different in growing a business that's innovative, that's doing something at the margins of normality in any category in consumer packaged goods, right? And the world I'm in, everybody is doing something sort of weird, right? There's it's either naturally formulated, or it's even more weird. It's got strange ingredients in it. And there's an audience out there.
Yes.
And then the challenge becomes, how do you find that audience, and then find out that what I call the scalable consumer outcomes that you could actually go and message out to, not Beavis and Butthead. I'm thinking of. I've run out of 1980s metaphor. Ted Bundy. There we go. Yeah. So I always tell my clients, you have a different set for each gender, so I don't offend people. But for the male clients, it's Ted Bundy. You need to be able to feed your thing to Ted Bundy, and if his eyes open without any language shared, then you need to invest in this business, because in food and beverage, the first thing you got to conquer is like the mainstream palate. And if you can get that down, then you're going to find the people who understand, who are going to be interested in the modern approach to whatever it is, yogurt or potato chips or whatever it is that you're trying to do that's innovative. And I think the challenge is that people, they don't spend enough time early on talking with their consumers. And this is what I talk about in, actually throughout my damn book. Ramping Your Brand, available on Amazon.
And I wanted to, it's rampingyourbrand.com is the website. I want to kind of start, for sake of time, I want to make sure we cover all this. And whenever you're making a brand premium, and you have where you talk about premium and we just kind of got into this a little bit, but the cultural logic behind it.
So there's the cultural logic is that there is, in our society, especially in America, there is an increasing desire to have everyday objects, including everyday brands in everyday categories like milk and potato chips and things that don't seem that important by themselves. There's a desire to have them reflect a modern set of just newness, really, right? And so part of that is related to health and wellness trends, which you know well. And being healthier itself is a form of, and seeming healthier and signaling to others through your brand choices that you are more healthy than the average Joe, shuffling into Walmart.
Right.
Right. Which is sort of the constant foil, right? This is a value to a certain set of Americans. They tend to be college educated, and they do tend to be younger. If you go to post-grad educated people like me, it's like 80% of them. So it's just, and those people also tend to have a lot of money, so they're easy targets in terms of getting people to try new things. But it's the desire to appeal to modernity and seeming modern. So in my book, I say you can find these people by going to a barbecue, any barbecue, and you can just run around, be the annoying anthropologist, and just ask this question. So just look at some hipster brand that they have and basically say, why are you having that instead of a Diet Coke?
Mm.
And they'll give you the polite answer, and that's bullshit. It'll be something like vaguely like, oh, I just want it to be healthier. I'm like, what, Diet Coke's not healthy? And so this is how you have to ask when you're a good social scientist. You have to basically start arguing with them because you have to get them past the bullshit, the performance.
Yeah.
And then if you just needle them enough with why, like a 5-year-old, and that many social scientists have written about the fact that good social inquiry is basically acting like a toddler. Like, why? And if you keep going, most people, and yes, I've done it, most people will basically just blurt out something that's basically the truth. And it's totally inappropriate almost all the time. It'll be something like, I don't want to, it's not the 80s, man. That's why I'm having this.
Right.
I don't want to drink the shit my grandfather ate, and so it's just, so it'll come out. And then other people, there's another bunch of people who are honestly using food and consumer choices to tell themselves and other people that, look, I'm not a hick anymore. I'm not a blue collar guy anymore. That's a whole domain of politically incorrect analysis that I've also done. But it's a mark of, I've made it, man. So for my dad, and I can say this because my dad was a working class guy, child of a roofer, and then he went to Harvard Law School. Now that's a rapid change in lifestyle.
Yeah, that's huge. That's a jump up.
Yeah. So, when my dad in the 80s, what did he drink for beer? Newcastle Brown Ale imported, St. Pauli Girl imported. Just like, he bought this most expensive beer he could find. Because on the weekends, that's a story he tells himself. Hey, I did it. I got myself out of there. Now, do I care about that? Not personally, no, because I grew up in comfort. But to him, that's an important thing to say. So there's that group, the socially mobile, and then there's other people who just, and I think we call them the health and wellness crowd, who are just, they want to be seen. And they do honestly want to be healthier, but they want to be seen as healthier as well. And so the brands, by switching up the brands and chasing these new modern attributes and stuff that they offer, they feel more in control of their health. Now you can hear in my voice that I'm skeptical that any of this is real.
Now, do you think it's?
I keep that out of my sales and marketing, but I think
Right. Yeah, no. Do you think
But
it's tribalism? Like, because I always see people for instance, let's use Karen. Everybody's all mad at Karens now. See the
poor
Karen,
Karen.
she has the white poor Karen. She has the white Lexus. She goes to yoga class. She wears Lululemon. She gets her hair and nails done. She goes and gets a massage. Her husband's kind of large and an asshole. And she's upper middle class, and whenever he's an attorney or doctor or something,
Right.
chiropractor, it's perfect. But when it's like, why it seems like people buy the same type of brands and act the same type of way. You know what I mean? Based
That
on what their
is,
interpretation is.
yeah, the number one tribal system that we have in the United States that no one wants to talk about, and it affects everything that I study and my clients. It's the reason they're making a lot of money, is social class. So, this is a bit academic, but it's alluded to in my book. But the upper middle class in the last 25 years has more than doubled in size.
Yes.
So we used to, and if you just look at something simple like education, when my grandfather, he's been dead for 20 years, but 30 years. But when he went and got a college degree in like 1920, I think it was less than 2% of Americans had a college degree. I mean, he basically was part of the elite instantaneously.
No,
I mean,
that makes sense. Yeah.
He didn't have a big head about it, which is just shocking. But he could have easily. Right now, it's 40% of young people and 30% of the country has a college degree. So that doesn't actually mean anything anymore. So what you have are, you have this new upper middle class, which tends to be post-grad educated. And that it's literally become an enormous number of people, Jason. And I personally,
the middle class that are wanting to be upper middle class. Is that
I
the
can
driver for purchasing?
Yeah, I can tell you from my own research in the United States, but that even though social mobility from the lower rungs, like my dad's story, it's actually harder now than it was in the 50s when he did it, to come from the lower working class to lower classes and make it to the upper middle class. That kind of leap just doesn't happen anymore. It's super depressing. But what has happened is a lot of normal middle class people, the paper route middle class, just millions of those people vaulted into six-figure household income, upper middle class lifestyle. And it honestly created Whole Foods because they're the heavy shoppers.
Yes, right.
They're the people who fill carts at Whole Foods.
Costco.
Right? Yeah, and Costco, right. So you see it around us. And yes, they're tribal in a vague sense, because they will notice the brand's assortment in homes when they go there. They'll notice that, this dude eats they have a lot of Pop-Tarts in their kitchen and stuff like that. And these are snotty little things, but this is unfortunately how humans behave. And we have a very hierarchical sort of society in this respect, and brands are used in that theater to distinguish themselves. I think what I work with clients on are even more narrow tribal things, which are, how do you understand the specific niche groups, the surfers, so to speak, that you can connect to early on to drive crazy amounts of conversion, which I have a whole section in my book about. How do you get an irrational amount of your early consumers to be repeat geeks, right? Because that's much more financially efficient as a business person to go into one market in 200 or 300 stores and have 80% of your sales come from a very low number of people that you can actually reach out and touch and talk to. Right? Otherwise, you have to do what my old clients do, which is just turn on the advertising machine. But nobody who's
though.
Yeah, you can't. There's no one here's the thing: people who raise money as early stage companies that I work with, the investors aren't interested in having that spent on advertising. Trust me. So it's really not a tool available to you, and that's the premise of my book. Is like, you can't do marketing the way it's taught in business school as an early stage consumer brand, because what's taught in business school is for lays. It's not you. You know,
Right. No,
so
it makes sense.
I see all these people who leave big companies because they don't like the bureaucracy and the bureaucratic culture, yada yada, and then they try to go to work for my clients, and it's a freaking disaster, Jason. they don't. They're not scrappy. They don't know
Oh,
how to
right.
operate in a resource light environment. But also, they've been trained to do the exact wrong things, right? Which is, turn on big megaphones, spend a lot of money. It's just not how this works. What works is is finding the right people. And part of that, you could argue, is behavioral analysis if you're fans. It doesn't have to fill a dissertation in anthropology by any means, but not talking to them doesn't help.
Right.
It's just like, listen to your fans. What are they telling you about why they buy it? Have your marketing reflect that. Learn from them and then feed that right back into the universe. And that's actually how you do this. There's no hero Don Draper who's going to come in with a suit and just sort of divine from his navel or gonads, what you should say. I mean, that's bullshit.
Yeah, exactly.
It's just which is why there's a television series making fun of it. So it's just
a swoosh with the "just do it," and then now next thing you know, you're billions and billions of dollars. That Phil Knight story that normally doesn't happen.
Well, the funny thing about the swoosh is Nike. That's not the story of Nike from its beginning. That's the story of Nike after it made it. So I mean, you got to go back to the 70s to learn how Nike really got going. That's actually kind of interesting, but we don't have time for that.
So whenever you're looking at, because I want to get through, I mean, you have in your Ramping Your Brand book, you have Designing to Command a Premium, Managing a Small Experiment, which I thought was interesting. You have this, and maybe you can touch on this just for a few minutes. Don't hit the gas too early. So whenever you're seeing startups that are coming in, what do you mean by, because everybody wants to, especially entrepreneurs, they want to go, 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 go. What are you talking about? Don't hit the gas too early.
So I generally refer to retail distribution, which is what the big temptation is in my particular sector. It's to, spend a year or two screwing around and then raise some capital through your networking and then basically just start, get yourself into Target and just fly all over the country and add 10,000 stores, 5,000 stores. It's not necessarily easy to do that, but it's becoming easier, Jason. It's actually kind of frightening how easy it is to do that. Because some of these mass market chains are so desperate competitively for to seem even 2% hipper than Target.
Right.
Walmart wants to be 2% hipper than Target. So there's a huge temptation to sell into too many stores. And the reason I say people have to be careful is that they need to figure out what we were just talking about. Do you even know your consumers? Do you know them? Do you know what the drivers are that are scalable, that'll turn this into a $100 million business as opposed to a niche business? Have you done that work yet? So that your marketing, when you raise money and fund it, will be getting the right people to come into the stores you're now selling. Because if you haven't figured all these touch points out, then you shouldn't be adding 2,000 and 3,000 stores nationwide, because what are you going to do? Just throw up an Instagram feed of your trademark? Nobody's going to notice it. They don't give a shit.
Right.
So you've got to be able to have a holistic go-to-market strategy, including out-of-store activation, that you fine-tuned at a smaller scale. And the best time to do that is when you're smaller, because you'll take more risks, Jason. Hiring yoga teachers to be your brand ambassadors was kooky.
Mm-hmm.
It really was. It still is. If you look at big budget field marketing that Coke does, they would never do that. They would go to some brand. They would go literally to a branding agent, a brand ambassador, or field marketing agency, and they would just hire these nice sort of all blonde women who would just show up and do the standard thing, and it'd be soulless.
Right.
Right. Now, when you're Coca-Cola, it doesn't matter.
Right.
Yeah, because Coca-Cola doesn't have to explain to anybody why you have it. It's just but if you're selling I don't know, some aloe juice or something, you've got to explain to people why you should drink something that you're supposed to put on to relieve sunburn. It requires an explanation.
Yeah, no, I mean, that makes sense. Whenever you're looking at, and not just, because you said don't hit the gas too early. So what I'm thinking of is, okay, you have this opportunity. I watched the documentary on HBO of that lady that, ripped everybody off of billions, Theranos or something like
Oh
that
yeah, it was a
company.
great story. Yeah, that was a great
Yeah,
one.
yeah. Well, that's where she got in trouble at, because Walgreens came to her and said, "Hey, let's open up all these little clinics where you were taking the blood out." She was basically doing an Edison thing where she was
Yep.
pretending like she had something when she didn't, hoping that it would hit in 4 years. But she got in trouble because Walgreens was making her execute. And this is what I'm seeing too is,
Oh yeah. Well, that's the most notorious example, I think. But see, there you're dealing with a sociopath. I'm sorry.
yeah, of course, yeah, she was a
She and sociopaths. Now here's an interesting one, Jason. I think they over-index for being entrepreneurs.
Because of her
I don't have
story was so compelling.
well because they work for themselves.
Oh,
They can't work with anyone else except unless they're the alpha. So
right, that makes sense.
any role in society like that, and I think that it tends to attract those people a little bit more. But her issue is she was so narcissistic. She's like the extreme example of someone who doesn't give a shit, like even who her business stakeholders are, let alone the end user. I mean,
Yeah, I
she
mean,
didn't care.
she could bullface lie, and whether
Oh
she
yeah, I mean, she just
believes
doesn't
it or not.
care,
Yeah.
right? And you're right. She was willing to lie to everybody and say, "Well, with the ego that, well, we'll figure it out."
Mm.
That's what she's telling herself. We'll just figure it out. It's just like the fact that she was like lying to get the door open. I don't encounter that a lot, although there's been some examples that are pretty close. Like the guy who founded Just Food, the mayo,
Mhm.
plant-based mayo. He got busted because he hired contractors to go buy the product off the shelf to drive up his velocities.
Oh, that's interesting.
I
Yeah,
mean,
that seems like that would
he
be
used investor money to hire contractors who would go in and buy his products so the velocities would go up, so he could, I don't know, better negotiate something with a retailer. Which is, unfortunately, the weird thing is it's not illegal, Jason, but it's like super unethical.
yeah, that would be, yeah, because you could just turn around and put it back into inventory, but you're basically using your advertising dollars
Yeah,
to purchase the product at retail.
it is super creepy. That's the worst case in CPG I've seen. There's plenty of corruption in my industry, but not to the level you just alluded to, I think. But it's a classic example of not caring about the end user,
Yes.
and that will blow up in your face. It was spectacular in her case, but I think it tends to just blow up in terms. It doesn't actually blow up; it just creates underperformance. I mean, I get outreach all the time from people who just like they look at consumer brand building. I think they read like 2 or 3 Inc. magazine articles, and then they read too many articles about impossible foods, and they're like, "Oh, I just need to." And they're usually in finance, and they're like, "Oh yeah, well I have a whole bunch of private equity buddies," so they raise a whole bunch of money, but they haven't vetted the idea in the market. They're not
Mhm.
patient enough to do what I would describe in my book, which is manage a small experiment for a year or two, figure out who the consumer is, fine tune your product, get it right, get it ready to hit the gas, and then go hit the gas. Right. Because that would require something that seems to be hard to find these days, which is patience.
Yeah, that I could imagine, especially when you have a CPG startup. That, I mean, they're just constantly chomping at the bit, but they don't realize it takes that ten
I
thousand
do.
hours to be the expert.
Yeah. And I mean, it doesn't take that long to learn about your consumer, but man, you've got to, you do have to understand that there's a process for CPG, I think specifically. And one of those is you have to finish the product with your consumer and market. That's what my book is basically screaming without doing it, is like, you're not done. Finish it with the consumer and the market because you don't actually know what you're doing. So
Yeah, I
it's
love
just
that.
and this is coming from somebody who used to get paid a lot of money to do the stupidest thing I've ever heard of in my life, which is like $500,000 or more in market research prior to a product launch. So you can convince some executive up the chain that down to the 4th decimal, this will be the forecast. And it never pans out that way. But they keep doing it, Jason. There's this entire industry of people who try to predict. Let's design the product and predict how it's going to do rather than create a hypothesis, and then go into the market and test and learn, which is what actually entrepreneurs are doing, whether they understand it or not. And the ones who figure that out early are the ones who they're going to do well because they're thinking more like a scientist. And those are the people who are more objective. They're not emotionally caught up with the business, even if they like it. They're looking at it as a business. But in the startup, I don't work with a lot of startups because they tend to be emotionally unable to. They're not coachable, Jason. They're too attached. I mean, literally, the baby is still in the stroller, man. So it's like I don't go anywhere near baby strollers. It's just like
Who do you for sake of time, I want to make sure that I'm respectful of your time. Who do you work with mostly, and then how? Because I know you have a section on your website, Ready to Ride the Ramp. For acceleration. Like who would you want to click on that button? I have 40,000 entrepreneurs listen to this. And if one of I know I encourage everyone to buy the book. They can learn some amazing things about branding, regardless of what industry you're in. But the Ready to Ride the Ramp, who would you want to click that button and partner with you?
I will turn my sales alter ego on, and he will say that we would. I like people with $1 million in trailing revenue on their books because I have a lot of data to suggest that they have what it takes already. I know it doesn't sound like a lot, but in my industry, most people can't even make it there. Emotionally, that's how bad it is. So $1 million in trailing, and they've raised a little money before, and they're ready to raise, or they have raised decent amounts of money, not absurd, not the numbers you see in Wall Street Journal, like stupid stuff. Reasonable amounts of money, and they want to scale. They now have been through the ringer, and they're like, oh, we've got something. We want this to keep going. And those are the folks that can benefit, I think, from exponential growth planning as an activity, because they're going to have enough fans historically, Jason, that they and I can go and research their fan behavior. And that's the first thing I do with all my clients as we do research. Very scrappy research. I've whittled it down, man. No dissertations. So it's just but that's what you want to do. And then with that insight, you can develop a plan that I think it's more investable, it's more bankable, and it's going to be financially more efficient too. I mean, there's nothing that pains me more than people who try to take investor money and just buy trial.
Oh yeah, I see that all the time. I'm in the tech industry.
Oh my God, no! Buying users, right? No, you need to buy. In my industry, you need to buy habitual. You need to get attention of people who are going to be. They're predisposed, is what we call in social science. They're predisposed to become habitual users, and that requires a little more thinking. So it's not impossible. It's not rocket science, but that's what you want to do. And that's what I help people with. But they need to be at that level, because 80% of brands, Jason, in my sector, 80% never make it past 500,000 on their books. Can you believe that?
80%. That's crazy. So
they flame out, they quit, they flame out, they get bored. Yeah. I mean, there's just an ocean of people who have hobby businesses. And I have nothing against that. I mean, I'm not offended by it. Do whatever you want, man. But it's it's hard for me to make any kind of case to that large group of people. Just to give you an idea of what we're talking about, I conservatively estimate that there are 40 to 50,000 early stage food and beverage brands alone. Most people don't understand it. And 80% of them are selling 500,000 or less. And I know it sounds like I'm making this up, but I'm not.
That's crazy.
It's a lot of people. And a lot of these folks are really just like artisan food. They're like local businesses, right? So they sell into like 50 stores, and that it's just their thing. And so they have no interest in scaling. They couldn't care less about this podcast or me or my book. And,
right.
Go to hell, man. So that's why I don't work with a lot of them, because it's sort of like it is a needle in a haystack for someone in my particular position, and they're just not interested. By the time you make it to 1 million, the retailers are treating you differently. And if you're not ambitious, they're going to be goading you to become ambitious. The people who didn't want to take the quiz on my site, they're the ambitious folks. And it's really funny because it's a scoring diagnostic quiz,
Mm.
5 minutes, and I'll tell you whether or not you have what it takes based on a lot of my case study and client work. And it's not representative at all. It definitely skews towards the people who do because it's self-selecting. So, it's what we call a biased sample. But I just use it for people who are ambitious and want to get a sense of, well, how far off the mark am I?
Yeah. So I mean, are you seeing companies that are at 1 million and they have a good product? Is it pretty easy to get them to, 5 million, 10 million?
That's not hard, I would say, with a modest infusion of six-figure capital. But I think getting past 10 million is where, and I've done the data science on this. It's in my book, which was one of the reasons I decided to write it, because I was sitting on this research. Getting past 10 million, crudely speaking, is the real challenge. So there's an enormous number of these $40,000 to $50,000 brands where the 20% that get above 1 million, they basically hit a wall.
Mm.
And I mean, it's not even a wall; it's a glass ceiling. Like, they can definitely see scale, but they're not going there. And that was my other inspiration for the book was, man, what's up with that? Because that's not a very big number. But to the entrepreneur, that is super frustrating because on average, it takes people 5-7 years to get there. So you can imagine what you would feel like if you were growing okay and then fast and then you hit a wall. I mean, that you'd be one frustrated dude. So I like
the 1 million wall is the big wall.
That's the huge one. And that appears to be mostly self-inflicted wounds based on my research.
So you're having to go in there, point out the wound, then tell them to stop.
Yeah, for my fees, no one pays for that, Jason. Yeah, no one pays for them. I'm good enough consultant to know that. So I stay away from those folks because it's sort of like, you're basically pointing at somebody's baby and saying, that's a nice kid, but the eyes are off center and one of them's doing
that's so awesome.
Cliff. I just sort of
yeah, exactly.
So it's just like, you won't make friends.
It's like the mom
way.
that takes the daughter to a beauty pageant.
Oh yeah,
and she is not. It's like, this girl shouldn't be here.
Yeah, right. Yeah, and those people don't have Asperger's. That's amazing. So you can see social context. Yeah, you can see it. That's a great example of how social context will empower normal people to be totally inappropriate.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
It's like beyond inappropriate.
Oh, that's awesome. Well, Dr. Richardson, I'm over my time with you. How would somebody, if they want to buy the book or if they want to get more information, maybe they're doing $1 million and they're stuck and it's a wall there. How would they get a hold of you and how would they purchase your book?
So anyone who wants the book, please go to Amazon.com. It's easy to find, Ramping Your Brand. I have an audiobook that'll be coming out literally in a month or two. So check for that on Audible. If they're interested in talk to me, I encourage them to take the quiz online. You go to my website, premiumgrowthsolutions.com. In the nav bar, it says, take the quiz. Take the quiz. If you'd like to talk with me, that'll put you on my VIP email list. And I always offer people a one-time 15-minute chat, meet and greet, get to know each other. And I think I let the founders do the rest of the work. They know when they want to hire me. That's what I've learned. I don't sell.
Yeah, no, that's cool. And like you said, they can go on Amazon and get the book. I encourage, I was slipping through it on Amazon. I encourage on my Kindle, because I think the book is, because you throw anthropology in there and data science. So you can almost, I know you have it specific to one type of industry, but I was pulling things out of it,
Oh yeah,
be used for any industry.
That's the next book, Jason. See,
that's
before
awesome.
you get the Random House deal, you got to have a platform. So.
Yeah, that's awesome. Exactly. I know how that goes. Well, cool. Well, I will. I'm going to let you go, Dr. Richardson. I appreciate you being on the ABQ Business Podcast. I will have the book links and everything in the show notes and the website. This is a fun conversation. I really enjoyed it. This is This is the type of conversations my audience loves. Just a real, honest conversation, and I love that.
I can't do anything else. That's my problem. Thanks, Jason. I appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you, sir.
All right, bye-bye.
Thank you for joining us on the Albuquerque Business Podcast. And thanks to our sponsor, RigbyDigital.com. Make sure to subscribe and share. And go to abqpodcast.com. Get show notes, resources, and links to everything we talked about today to help you navigate your journey as an entrepreneur and business owner.